Welcome back into another playoff preview show here at the Hockey Writers. We're into the second round now, and I've got a couple writers here for the next series that's coming up, a second round matchup between the St. Louis Blues and the Colorado Avalanche. I've got Kerry Collins that covers the Avalanche and Stephen Ground who covers the Blues. As you may recognize them from the first round, and both their teams are through, so they're continuing on into these preview shows. So, Kerry, Stephen, thanks for coming on again.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, for sure. So this series is going to be it's going to be an interesting one. Again, like the first round, I think the Avs are in for a bit more of a challenge this time with the Blues. The Predators put up a little bit of a fight towards the end there. Ingram played really well in goal, so kind of took over. And but just proved to be too much for the Avalanche. Just proved to be too much for the Predators. Our offense is just so good, and their power play is so good, and all that stuff. So let's go into this first one. The Avs swept. They swept the Predators. Blues 1-6 against the Minnesota Wild, which it was a really good series, back and forth. But the Blues kind of took over towards the end and played. Won a couple games to win the series. So. Looking back at those series, Avs, they were deadly on the power play. The Blues were deadly on the power play in their series too. So that's going to be an interesting matchup. Looking at the season series, the Avs won that 2-1. They were 1 for 11 on the power play. Blues were 2 for 7. Avs outscored the Blues 12-11. Not a huge difference there. So, it may be a pretty tight series, but let's look at this first matchup, which is going to be a pretty big one. Tarasenko, Perron, O'Reilly versus basically MacKinnon and Landeskog. Those are the two guys on forward that were most dominant in that series. So we'll go to you two first, Stephen. What do you think this matchup will be like? These three kind of dominated the scoring against the Wild, and going against MacKinnon, who looks like a man on a mission in this in the first round at least here.
Yeah, I think it'll be really interesting. The Blues really struggled to contain Kirill Kaprizov early in the series against the Wild. He took over, ended up, I think, scoring 7 goals in the entire series. And I think it showed a weakness that the Blues have in dealing with those dynamic superstar level players. But I do think they made a critical adjustment later in the series to, be very careful when he was on the ice, not to pinch and not to give him the chance for breakaways. And I think we'll see that carry over when they're trying to deal with the top stars on the Avalanche too. MacKinnon, I think historically has not had a ton of success against the Blues relative to how good he is. That he's still a very good player, but I think they've done an okay job shutting him down. It'll be really interesting to see O'Reilly, playing against his former team, trying to be that defensive force. I think the Blues, as much as that top line was most important in the first series, they are going to have to get some depth scoring, which I'm sure we'll talk about more in a few minutes. But they cannot be a one-line team against the Avalanche, or they're toast. So I think it'll be a fun matchup. I think the Avalanche obviously had the edge first line against first line, but I do think O'Reilly and Perron and Tarasenko will provide some challenges for sure.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Kerry, I'm looking at the series against the Predators. MacKinnon was really good. He had 5 goals in the series and kind of dominated. And we'll talk about the other guy that dominated in that series next. But what do you think this matchup will be like of MacKinnon versus these three that kind of, they provided the bulk of the scoring against the Wild? What do you think will happen here?
It's tough because particularly for MacKinnon, he is tough to bottle up, especially early, especially when he's mad. So when they get going, the start for him is so important. It's paramount. If he scores in the first period, look out. But against that top line, there's a little more responsibility. Landeskog kind of played on the second line. It'll be interesting if they move him up to kind of slow down guys like O'Reilly, because O'Reilly was incredible that whole series. Yeah. It's those types of matchups, like where is Jared Bednar going to put, Landeskog? Is he going to put him back up with MacKinnon and Rantanen, or is he going to keep him there with Kadri and just kind of beat everybody up? So, but yeah, slowing down MacKinnon it's a thing everybody talks about, and like a lot of teams have hard time executing. And it's just, I know that he's on a mission in these playoffs. He's talked about it. He's not shy about it. So watching him, especially in that first game, is going to be, kind of a tone setter for Colorado, I think.
Well, 100%. I mean, he looked so good in that series. And the Predators, obviously, they were missing some guys that, their goaltending wasn't that good. And props to Ingram, though. He had a heck of a series when he had to come in and be the number one and as a rookie goaltender. So, he did his best. But again, the Avs just proved too much. MacKinnon just proved too much to do to defend against. But there's another guy that was really hard to defend against. He's broken some records on these playoffs, and this is a guy named, everyone knows, Cale Makar. I mean, again, we said a lot about him in that first preview. We're going to say more because he had 10 points in that series, and it's a thing that hasn't been done in the history of the NHL. So let's go to you, Steven. How are they going to stop Makar? I mean, this guy is just, he's just, I don't know. There's not much more to say about him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm going to echo something I said about Kaprizov in our first preview, but I don't think they probably can stop him. They can only hope to contain him somewhat and limit the damage that he does. And I think the best way they're going to be able to do that is have, some of their forwards who are more defensive on the ice, marking him as close as they can which is obviously easier said than done, but when they're on the ice. And they have some weapons on defense now. Scott Perunovich came in and played a role in the first series, which was completely unexpected. He's a very similar defenseman, obviously nowhere near the caliber that Makar is, but a very similar pedigree, college defenseman, Hobey Baker winner, speedy puck control. And I think they're just going to have to, try and match what Makar can do on the power play, and just kind of equal his damage on the other end, because I don't think they're going to be able to truly stop him and shut him down. If they could, they'd win the series, but I don't think that's going to happen.
Makar's been, like I say, he's been amazing. Kerry, you've watched him all season long. Playoffs, the first round, he was, double digits in points already. Talk about he could be Conn Smythe already. I mean, this is really early, but there's been rumbles about that too. What do you think about Makar? How is he going to impact this series?
Well, I mean, he doesn't leave the ice. If and he's on the power play. I think he had 7 assists out of his 10 points. I think 4 of them were on the power play. That's where you got to slow him down. You just cannot give him those chances. I do not think that's going to happen against the Blues. The Blues were a top 4 team on the penalty kill all year. So I'd be surprised if he comes out with like 5 power play points or something in the first 4. If they do, they're sunk. But I just think it's really hard to bottle him up just because he's such a dangerous skater, let alone, I mean, he's a good defenseman. He's got a good shot. He's got good vision, but man, can that guy skate, and that gets him out of so much trouble. I mean, everybody saw that goal against the Blackhawks this year where he just kind of, stopped on a dime, came back and scored that in overtime. And that's a thing that you don't expect defensemen to do. And he can do it. And it's one thing to, like you said, I don't know if you're going to stop him. He's going to get some points. They score goals and he plays so many minutes. And it's just a matter of, bottling up those chances and keeping it so that, those guys just don't get out and go. They don't get out and run, because that's when they kill everybody.
Yeah. Oh, and that's the thing. It's hard to defend against a defenseman that can do this, because you got to defend. You got to watch for MacKinnon and Rantanen and all those guys, and then you got Makar to swoop in and do, be that extra forward sometimes, and it's hard to defend, and that's what makes him so dangerous. And like you say, the skating is just off the charts. So. You mentioned the power plays. Let's talk a bit about that matchup. It's going to be the battle of the power plays, because the Avs had 7 goals on the power play in the first round. The Blues had 8, 43.8% versus 30.8. The penalty killing is going to be huge in this series. And, Steven, looking at the Blues throughout the season, can they slow down the Avalanche's power play And I mean, Kerry by extension will go after Steven answers. By extension, what do you think the Blues will be able to do for that test? Steven, what do you think?
Yeah, I think they can. I think the Blues truly have one of the most elite special teams in the league. Obviously, the Avalanche do as well. But when you look on both sides of the ice, I think they're top 5 in each category in the regular season, and they certainly, I think that was the difference in the Wild series is we converted on a lot of power plays in the Wild. The games that they won, they did as well, and the games that they didn't, they were not as successful. So I think if they're going to win this series, they're going to have to find a way to neutralize the Colorado power play. But I think they can do it. And I think on the penalty or on their power play, the addition of Perunovic, who really has been almost used as a specialist there since he rejoined the lineup after a long injury. We already talked about him, but that's provided such an extra, pop to that line that was already very good. And I think that'll be an interesting element to watch as he shakes off more rust and gets a little more comfortable in the playoff setting, how he impacts the series as well.
Mm-hmm. Kerry, what do you think about the Avs, of course, have a really good power play, but they're going to have to try to stop the Blues as well. Can they do that? Can they win that battle of the special teams? Because it's going to be huge in this series.
Yeah, it's tough because, they were just kind of a middle of the road. I think they were 15th or 16th in the NHL in the power play or in the penalty kill, excuse me. And that, if anybody that watched any of those last 3 games, you said, geez, the Wild are just giving them too many chances. The Avalanche in the playoffs in particular. You said the Blues were 30.8% on the power play, and they just got, compared to the other team, they're just crushed. It's just that's ridiculous. I think that's a big point for both of these teams. They've got to stay away from the penalty box. Of course, power plays happen and things like that, but having a penalty kill like St. Louis has had all year is a huge benefit in the postseason. Look at Carolina. They were the best penalty kill in the league, and Boston couldn't get anything on them in those first few games at all, and whether they had an extra skater or not. So it's so important, especially against a high-powered team. If you look at that last series, they scored 5 goals at least in 3 of the games or whatever, and you just can't give them that extra chance because it just puts you so far behind. And for Colorado on the penalty kill too, they've got to be better. They're not going to score 7 a night or anything like that. So they've got to be better because this is going to be a tighter series. It's just a better team.
Yeah. Oh, and that's the thing. And you talked about, the goaltending is way different in this series compared to what Nashville brought. And let's talk about that goaltending matchup. Darcy Kuemper, who got hurt in that series. It was scary injury, and it's good that it wasn't as bad as it was initially looked like it was going to be. And then you got on the Blues side, Jordan Binnington looks like he's the Binnington of old that won that cup a couple of years ago. And then Billy Husso, who started that series, and Binnington ended it. So starting with you, Steven, what do you think? Binnington will probably start this series. Is he back? Is he back to being that type of a goaltender who could just steal games? And will he be the difference in this series?
Yeah, I think he absolutely is the starter again, which I think, not just looking beyond the playoffs, assuming he doesn't collapse in this series is about the best thing that could have happened for the Blues franchise, whether they win or lose, just because of his contract and how important he is to the team. I hesitate to say he's back to the historic, unbelievable levels that he had in 2019 when he carried the team to the cup, but there's no secret that he's always been a goalie that thrived on confidence and having a chip on his shoulder and really played best when his back was against the wall. And I think losing the job to Husso, watching his counterpart start playoff games over him, I think that finally put him in a mindset where he was ready to get back into this form. And we talked about it, I think, last time. at the end of the season, he was far from terrible. His overall numbers looked pretty bad, but he was much better in the finals 13 games or so. So it's not necessarily coming from, rock bottom to the top of the world again. I think it's more of a, middle to the top, but I definitely think he's, kind of a major factor for the Blues. Obviously goaltending always is, but if he can be as good as he was at the end of the Wild series, it's going to be pretty hard for the Avs to beat him.
Oh, that's right. I mean, then you look at the Avs side, Kerry, you're looking at Darcy, Kuemper, Francouz, who started a lot, in the first round. Anything about Kuemper? Is he going to be back in this series, or are they going to have to rely on another goaltender?
Just within the last day or two, that sounds like he's been cleared to play in the second round. I think they're going to need him for sure. Just like I said, I don't think you're going to be going up against a rookie and scoring 5 goals every night. So they're going to need him. That's the reason they brought him in is, to kind of replicate sort of, or try to what Grubauer did last year. And he's been pretty good. He was good. That was just a total fluke injury. Francouz, he comes in and he was okay, but you give up 3 goals, it's kind of hidden when it's 5-3 and, and things like that. I just don't think that's going to happen against these guys. There's been a lot of goals scored in this series though. Between these teams last year in the playoffs and then this year, even the 3 games, there's been a ton of goals scored. It's just, I just think they need that Kuemper in there because he's the guy that they're going to, and that's why they brought him in. And as long as he's been cleared to play, I don't think if there was any chance Bednar would play him he can only see half the rink. But that was a really scary injury. And it sounded looked much worse at the time than it ended up being, but it still ended up being pretty bad. So getting him back is a big deal. They've got to have him. And, and he's kind of struggled. He's been just okay against the Blues this year. So, that's going to be a big storyline throughout this whole series.
Yeah. The goaltending is, like I say, this is this is a cool, nicer matchup, I think, to watch because they're both, Kuemper is good. Binnington it's a really even matchup. So it's going to be fun to watch all that. Let's move to the X factors. So there's going to be some guys that are going to have to step up. Perron did that for the Blues in the first round. He was a big X factor for that series. Steven, who are you picking as an X factor? I'm sure you probably wished you picked Perron in that first round.
Yeah, I thought about it, which seems like hindsight, but I'm going to say Robert Thomas is the number 1 guy who's going to be an X factor in this series. He didn't have a bad first series, I would say, but he didn't score a goal. He didn't appear on the stat sheet a lot. And especially early in that series, the line he had with Buchnevich and Tarasenko that had been so good late in the season was not performing, and they ultimately broke it apart, as you mentioned earlier, and moved Tarasenko up a line. So I think, it's going to be Ryan O'Reilly's job to quote unquote match Nathan MacKinnon. He's obviously not the same kind of player, but he can potentially have the same kind of impact. So it's going to be Robert Thomas's job to kind of play at that cadre level and give that kind of output, give that sort of super versatile second center look that he was able to give most of the season. I think he can continue to do that, but it's sort of on him now to step up and pick it up another level past where it was in the first series. And if he can, that's going to be a huge boost for St. Louis.
Yeah, they're going to need depth scoring beyond that top trio that did so much against the Wild. So yeah, Thomas is a good pick there, and he was so good in the regular season too. So we'll see if he can do that in the second round. Kerry, who are you picking for the Avalanche? That could be an X factor in this series.
I think it's Devin Taves. There's all the spotlight is always on Cale Makar, Nathan MacKinnon, Miko Rantanen, guys like that. And, lost in that first series was in those 4 games, Taves had 3 goals and 2 assists.
Yeah.
All right. If his defensive partner doesn't score twice that many points, probably talking about him a little bit more. And he has been so good both ways going, for Colorado all year. He brings that danger from up at the point. He's an electric, offensive player. He's got a great shot and he can hit. And I just think that, with all the focus on some of those other guys, this is another guy that is talented offensively and he can make a difference on defense too. So rightfully so, the spotlight is on all those other guys. Don't get me wrong, but when they traded for Devon Toews, there was a lot of people that said this is a big, this is a really, really good move. And it has turned out to be, he's been great ever since he got to Colorado. And in that first series, I just think with all those other big numbers that were put up, I just think, you got 3 goals and 2 assists from a defenseman and no one's talking about it. So I think he could be a big factor in this series.
Yeah. Well, Devon Toews has been, that underrated partner to Makar, and, you need those types of guys to play it with a high flying offensive superstar like him. And nothing against Toews. He's been really good offensively too, but he's also one of those great shutdown guys that can play with Makar. So very underrated trade. And I think they only got him for a 2nd round pick, which is insane. So
there was a lot of people at the island that follow the Islanders that were not very happy because of what they got in return. I think they knew something had to give. They had all those defensemen and, but I think that's all that they gave up was a 2nd rounder, which looks pretty good right now.
This looks really good. It's going to be interesting to see if those two can keep doing what they're doing and make a difference in this series too. So let's ask a question here. Kerry, we'll start with you. The Colorado Avalanche will win this series if
they have to stay out of the penalty box. The Blues have shown that right now, and Colorado's had a great power play, but the Blues have shown they are so dangerous right now.
Yeah.
And there was times they were running the same play back to back and Minnesota still couldn't stop it. And that might be more on Minnesota, but they've just got to stay out of the box. They're not, like I've said this multiple times, you're not going to get 5-6 goals a night anymore. It's just everything tightens up, and everybody knows the last 3 years, the horrors of the 2nd round for the Avalanche, 7 games to the Sharks, then 7 games to Dallas where they had 2 goalies get hurt. And then last year they opened 2-0 against Vegas and losing 6 games. Yeah. So this is an enormous hurdle for them. And I just think they want to bash through that wall, and it's the penalty kill. They're going to have to be really good on the penalty kill to get out of this series.
Yeah. Well, again, the special teams, I think, is going to be huge in this series. In the end, this we'll be talking about. Steven, the St. Louis Blues will win this series if
I think if they remember who they are now. We talked a lot last time about how the identity of the team has changed. They're not a physical, big, grinding defensive team anymore, and they cannot play the Avalanche like they are, because if they do, the Avs will skate circles around them. They need to. They need to remember that they actually had more goals this season than the Avalanche, just slightly. They were 2nd in the league. The Avs were 3rd, and they need to be willing to go toe-to-toe on offense. Alert but not afraid when the MacKinnon line is on the ice. And then using your depth to find that scoring, and find the 9-20 goal scorers we had in the regular season need to show up. And if they can do all that, it's a tall order, probably the best team in the league this year. But if they can do all that, they have a chance.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. I think this series, it's going to be back and forth. I think it will be ultimately low scoring. It's not going to be a huge, although, the first round was insane for blowouts back and forth. So, I guess I can't say that. So it may actually turn out to be the same thing. Let's get some final predictions then. We had a lot of series go to game 7, 5 of them in this first round. So let's see what happens with this one. Steven, what are you saying this series is going to end up as?
I feel like I'm, letting some Blues fans down out there. I'm sure. I do think the Avalanche take this series, but I do think it'll be 6 or 7 games. I gave the Blues about a 30% chance of winning, and then Money Puck gave them like a 30.4% chance of winning. So I felt pretty good about that. But I think in the end, the Avalanche take it, and I hope it's just a closer, more fun series than last year. I'll say Avs in 6.
All right, Avs in 6. Kerry, what are you saying this series is going to end as? It's going to be fun to see how long this goes.
Yeah, you look at the regular season and there was those 3 games. I think Colorado won 2 of them and they were all pretty high scoring. Then last year that series was kind of high scoring, even though I thought that was going to be closer than it was. And Colorado just walked them out of the building. It's hard to predict like a second round series for the Avalanche. I never dreamed last year that they'd be down 2-0 to anybody and lose 4 in a row. I never thought that would ever happen. And I just think this year it's different. Like when you watch them, it's different. It's not just let's get through this. They came out in that first game and they had 3 goals in the first 8.5 minutes. And one of them came with the other team on the power play. So it was like, I just think that this team is so good. And they match up pretty well with St. Louis. So if they can get past, get into Binnington's head, things like that. And if Binnington stands on his head, there's nothing you can do about that. But I just think, like Steven said, I think we were looking at 6 games, though. I don't think St. Louis loses 2 in a row at home or anything like that. So I think St. Louis takes a couple, but I think Colorado, gets rid of that curse and moves on in 6 games. That's what I would say.
All right. So we got an Avs win in 6. So let's see if that happens. And but it's going to be a fun second round series. And this is the first one that was set. And the rest are still going. We don't know. Game 7.
You've got these 5 game 7s, and then you had 2 that went 6, and then like Colorado's just been sitting around like Daryl Sutter predicted, like he said, whoever plays them in the first round, it's a waste of 8 days. And that's exactly what they did. They just ran right through them. So it'll be interesting to see. The Kuemper thing's a big deal. And I think Binnington coming back makes this a little more interesting.
Yeah.
But I'm just glad I'll get to see at least 4 more games of Ryan O'Reilly against the Avs, because those are so fun. He's so good against them, and those he's just fun to watch against them.
Yeah. Well, it's a former team trying to come back against them, so it's going to be fun. So thanks, guys, for coming on another preview show here. We'll see who's left standing in the 3rd round and see who's going to be back on with me with a new person. And it feels like Survivor. You're like getting voted off the island. So thanks for coming on. And make sure you're following both of these guys' coverage of this series. It's like the first one, and we'll see what happens. And follow the Hockey Writers for everything else, and on Twitter, Facebook. Follow this YouTube channel. Thanks for watching all these other previews that we did. It was great giving these previews to you guys. So thank you so much, and we will see you next time when we preview the next second round series, which will be set the next couple days here. So thanks everyone for watching.